In 1932, in the heart of New York City, in a reservoir that had been drained and forgotten just north of Belvedere Castle, a group of men who had not held a paying job in 3 years built a house out of brick. Not a lean-to, not a tent, a brick house with a roof of inlaid tile laid by the hands of unemployed bricklayers who still remembered exactly how. The men of that camp called it the mansion. A few yards away, others had quarried the reservoir's own stone blocks and stacked them into a shanty that stood a full 20 feet tall. Now, most people, when they picture a Hooverville, picture a garbage heap. They picture filth and ruin and people who had simply given up, throwing scraps together with no skill and no care. And that picture is a lie. The truth is that these were some of the most resourceful builders this country has ever produced. Men and women who took the things a city throws away and turned them into warm, dry, standing homes. The cardboard the world had discarded became walls. The newspaper they handed out as a cruel joke, the thing they called the Hoover blanket, became something else entirely in their hands. Before this is over, I am going to show you the single heating mistake that could burn an entire camp to the ground in one night. And I am going to show you the one building trick these people stumbled onto by pure instinct that modern building science can now put an exact number on. They were right, and it took us decades to prove it. These are 25 hidden building tricks from the Depression that turned cardboard and tin and dirt into homes the city kept bulldozing. And the reason they kept bulldozing them is the very thing nobody expects. So let us begin the count. Number 25, the crate frame. Every man who could swing a hammer knew that the bones of a house were free if you knew where to look. Fruit crates, packing boxes, shipping cases, all of it was thin pre-cut lumber, already milled, already squared, waiting at the back of every grocer and every rail yard in America. You pried them apart nail by nail, saved every nail in a tin, and stood the slats into a stud frame. It cost nothing but the work of your hands and the patience to pull 1,000 small nails without bending them. But a wall of bare single boards lets the wind whistle straight through every seam, and the man who built one learned fast that the frame was only the beginning. What you nailed over it was what kept you alive. And before we go on, if you find yourself moved by what these people managed, do subscribe, because what is coming up the count could one day matter to your own family more than you think. Number 24, salvaged glass. A real window was a luxury beyond price, so you scavenged broken sash and cast off panes from demolition lots and fitted them into a frame of your own. A pane of glass did two things at once. It let in the daylight, which meant you did not burn precious fuel for light, and it caught the low winter sun and gave back a little warmth on a clear afternoon. The trouble was that the same glass that let the light in let the heat right back out after dark, which is why the fight against the cold was never won at the window. It was won inside the walls. Number 23, working the dump. The smartest builders did not site their shacks near the river first. They sited them near the town dump because the dump was their lumber yard, their hardware store, and their roofing supplier all in one. Hoovervilles rose beside trash piles all across the country for exactly this reason. A man learned the dump's rhythms, knew which day the cans came, which corner the demolition crews unloaded, and he claimed his finds before anyone else stirred. But the finest salvage in the world was worthless if you set your door in the wrong place, which is a lesson men paid for in long, cold nights. Number 22, the mailbox. This one sounds small, and it was anything but. Down on the Seattle waterfront, shacks that had stood for years had mailboxes nailed beside the door with real addresses. A mailbox was dignity, yes. A man could be written to, but it was also a quiet legal foothold, a small claim that this was a residence and not a pile of refuse, and that mattered when the eviction notices came. Still, an address bought you nothing if the structure behind it could not survive a single hard winter, and surviving the winter was a matter of craft. Number 21. Reading the wind. Before the first nail went in, an experienced builder stood on his patch of ground and felt where the wind came from. He set the door on the sheltered side. He kept the windows out of the teeth of the weather. He turned the long blank wall to face the cold. It cost nothing, and it slowed the wind, but slowing the wind was not stopping it, and cold still poured straight through a single board wall like water through a sieve, which is where the real work began. Number 20. Lining the walls with cardboard. They had a name for the cardboard a man slipped inside his worn-out shoe to cover the hole in the sole. They called it Hoover leather, and the very same trick scaled up to a whole wall. You flattened cartons and layered them against the inner face of the boards, and in the thin gap between the cardboard and the wood, you trapped a sliver of still air. That trapped air was the secret, though almost nobody putting up the cardboard could have told you why. Cardboard was a start. It was about to be joined by something printed. There is a turn coming in this list now, away from the simple tricks and into the dangerous ones, the skills that could cost you your hands, your fire, or your life. Stay close, because the next stretch is where survival got serious. Number 19. The Hoover blanket in the walls. The newspaper. They handed it out, and they joked that a man sleeping on a park bench under yesterday's headlines was wrapped in a Hoover blanket, the same way an empty turned-out pocket was a Hoover flag. It was meant to shame. But inside a shack, that newspaper became insulation. You packed it tight into the cavity between the boards, sheet upon sheet, and you stuffed it under the bedding. Renovators tearing into houses from that era still find the walls dense with it to this day. The paper held the heat. The danger was that the paper also loved to burn, and the thing that warmed the shack was the very thing that could end it. Number 18. Tar paper and the lath strip. Tar paper was the cheapest weather skin a builder could buy, and the whole question was how to keep the wind from peeling it off in the first gale. The answer was AF. You ran thin wooden strips over the seams and nailed them down hard, and where you had no lath, you used bottle caps, hammered flat as little washers so the nail head would not tear straight through the paper. It shed the rain beautifully. What it could not do was carry the weight of wet snow, and that sent every good builder looking up to the roof. Number 17. Tin can shingles. This is where the blood came in. A man saved every can he could find, cut the ends out, slit the side, and flattened it under his boot into a small rectangle of tin. Then he overlapped them up the wall and across the roof like fish scales, each one lapping the one below so the water ran off. It made a hard, rain-tight skin out of pure garbage. But tin cuts and rust weights in every old can and a careless hand meant a deep slice and the real fear of lockjaw, which in those years could kill a working man dead. Tin scaled the walls. The roof needed something that could span a wider gap. Number 16. Corrugated sheet and the license plate shake. When a man got lucky and found a length of corrugated metal, he had a roof that would outlast everything around it. And when the sheet ran short, he reached for the strangest shingle of them all, the license plate, nailed up in overlapping rows like steel shakes. A metal roof kept the rain out and held the heat in better than anything. And that, exactly that, is what made the next item on this list so deadly. Number 15, the stove and the fire that took the camp. Here is the mistake I promised you. Inside nearly every shack sat a small salvaged stove, and that stove was the whole heart of the home, your warmth and your cooking both. But picture it now, walls packed with newspaper, a skin of tar paper, cardboard lining the inside, a row of these shacks built wall to wall down a narrow lane, one tipped stove, one stovepipe that pierced the tar paper without a proper collar, one ember on a windy night, and the fire did not take a house. It took the row, it took the lane. Whole stretches of these camps could go to ash before a man could pull his children out the door. Warmth was bought at the price of fire, always. And fire was the fast killer. Damp was the slow one. Number 14, lifting the shack off the wet ground. Seattle's great Hooverville stood on the tidal flats beside the port of Seattle, where the ground was sodden and the water rose. The builders who lasted there did not set their floors on the mud. They raised them up on salvaged pilings and stacked timber so the floor stayed dry and the tide passed beneath. A dry floor was a healthy floor, but a raised shack still bled its heat out through the walls, and the next trick, fix that for nothing but sweat. We are halfway down now, and from here on, these are not tricks of convenience. These are the heavy skills, the back-breaking work that separated a shack that stood from a shack that fell. Keep watching. Number 13, stuffing the cavity. When the newspaper ran short, a builder filled his walls with whatever held still air, straw, chicken feathers by the sackful, even cordwood stacked tight between the studs, doubling as fuel he could pull out and burn in the dead of February. People remodeling these old places have found every one of these in the walls. It worked, but cavity fill was only ever half the answer. The real warmth came from a wall built twice. Number 12, banking with earth. A cold floor steals the life out of a house, and the cold comes in lowest, right at the line where the wall meets the ground. So the builder banked it. He piled sod and dirt up against the bottom of the outer walls, a low earthen skirt that stopped the draft dead and held the frost away from the floorboards. Free, heavy, and effective. And piling earth against the outside led a man naturally to the oldest idea of all, digging into the earth itself. Number 11, living in the city's own bones. Some of the cleverest never built walls at all. They moved into the things the city had already built and abandoned. Empty conduits, disused water mains big enough to crawl inside and lie down, parked freight cars that the men called Hoover Pullmans, a bitter nod to the luxury sleeper coaches none of them would ever ride. Borrowed infrastructure was dry and surprisingly warm, the steel holding the temperature steady. But a pipe was never yours, and a man wanted his own four walls, which drove the diggers back to the ground. Number 10, the dugout. This was shelter at its most primal and its most effective. You dug a deep pit into the earth and laid a roof over the top, and the ground itself became your insulation, holding off the wind and the worst of the cold. The way a cellar stays cool in summer and unfrozen in winter. The stakes were real. A dugout could flood in a heavy rain, the walls could slump, the damp could settle into a man's chest and never leave. But a buried floor needed a roof that could shed a whole winter, and that roof was the true test of any builder. Number 9, the layered roof. A roof was not one thing. A good roof was a sandwich built up in careful layers and pitched at a steep enough angle to throw the rain and the snow load clear before it could soak through or cave in. Boards first for the structure, tar paper over that to shed water, tin or corrugated sheet on top to take the beating. Each layer did one job, and the man who skipped a layer learned about it the first night the weather turned. But the finest roof in the world was useless if the smoke from your stove had nowhere safe to go. Number 8. The flue done right. This is a skill that does not look like much and quietly decided who lived and who did not. A salvaged stovepipe had to be routed so it drew clean and pulled the smoke up and out. It had to be sealed where it pierced that flammable tar paper or it lit the roof, and it had to draw well enough that the deadly invisible gas, carbon monoxide, went up the pipe and not into the lungs of a sleeping family. Get the flue wrong, and the stove that kept you alive killed you in your sleep instead. Master the flue, though, and a man could finally think about building something that would truly last, something in stone. From here to number 1, these are no longer survival tricks. These are the works of pride, the buildings that proved who these people really were. Watch what they did when they had a little time and a great deal of skill. Number 7, stone by men who knew stone. Among the unemployed were master masons and stone cutters, men whose entire trade had vanished overnight, and they did not let the skill die in their hands. With nothing but cast-off stone and broken brick, they raised structures that stood 20 feet high and lasted for years, solid enough that they outlived the camps around them. Stone was permanence in a world that had taken everything else away, and permanence is exactly what came next. Number 6, the brick house with the tile roof. Return now to that Central Park reservoir. The unemployed bricklayers there did not build a hut. They laid a true brick house, and they roofed it in with inlaid tile, fitting each piece by hand the way they once had on the homes of the wealthy. The camp called it the mansion, and they meant it without irony. Even the brick was scavenged, every piece carried in from a demolition somewhere across the city. It was proof, standing in the middle of the richest park in America, that skill does not vanish just because the paychecks do. And the grandest stone of all came from the city's own ruins. Number 5, quarrying the reservoir. The men in that drained Central Park reservoir looked at the great stone blocks of the structure they were squatting in, and they saw a quarry. They cut and hauled those blocks and built dwellings out of them, including that shanty 20 feet tall, lined up with the others along a lane they named Depression Street. They built the city back into the shape of homes, using the city's own discarded skeleton. But the strongest wall any of them ever built was one you could not see at all, and modern science can finally measure it. Number 4, the dead air. Here is the trick I promised you, the one they found by instinct that we can now prove with numbers. Every cold weather trick on this list, the cardboard liner, the newspaper packed in the walls, the wall built twice with a gap between, was doing one single thing. It was trapping still air. And trapped, motionless air is the real insulator. It is not the paper, and it is not the wood that holds the heat. It is the dead air caught inside them. Modern building science has put a figure on it. Cellulose insulation, which is nothing more grand than recycled newspaper, rates at roughly R3.2 to R3.8 for every inch of thickness, as good or better than the material sold today. So that Hoover blanket the newspaper handed out as a humiliation was not a joke at all. Packed into a wall, it was a working insulation system, and these people engineered it with their bare hands a lifetime before anyone gave it an R value. They had the physics dead right. But the true masterstroke was never any single wall. It was the whole town. Number 3, building a town, not a camp. The largest Hoovervilles were not chaos. Seattle's Hooverville ran under loose building and sanitation rules, with an unofficial mayor, a former lumberjack named Jesse Jackson, who had started the place with 20 other men, and a census so careful that we know there were 639 residents living there. Only 7 of them were women. They laid out lanes. They built a privy out over the water so the waste would carry away. They organized. That organization was the highest building skill of all, because it turned a scatter of shacks into a community with order and rules and a name. And a community, a real town, was the one single thing the city could not bring itself to tolerate. There is one last thing left to understand, and it is the heart of everything you have just seen. This is why they kept coming with the bulldozers. Number 2, building to be rebuilt. The Seattle police burned that camp to the ground, and the people rebuilt it. They burned it again, and the people rebuilt it a second time, with the Vigilance Committee organizing the work. In Washington, the Army itself, under General MacArthur, drove the war veterans of the Bonus Army out of their Anacostia camp with fire and bayonets. And here is what those builders understood that the authorities never did. They built so that they could build again. Light frames, salvaged parts, skills carried in the hands, and not in any one structure. You could burn the shack, but you could not burn the knowledge. Which leaves only the final question. Why send the bulldozers at all against homes built from the trash nobody else wanted? Number 1, because they were homes. That is the master skill that holds all the others, and it is the whole reason this story matters. These people did not build hovels. They had every excuse to, and they refused. They built homes, with mailboxes beside the door and tile on the roof, and a warm, dry room for the children, out of cardboard and tin and old newspaper and the stone the city threw away. And the city kept bulldozing them for one reason that nobody says out loud. A pile of garbage shames no one. But a home, a real home, built by a man the country had abandoned, standing warm and dignified in a public park that was unbearable to look at. It proved the people had not broken, even when everything around them had. And so the Hoover blanket, the thing meant to mock them, the newspaper, ends this story not as a joke and not even as insulation. It ends as the plain, warm proof that you can take everything from a person and they will still, with their own 2 hands, build something worth calling home. So here is the one thing I will ask of you, and it is small. The next time you are tempted to throw something away, stop for one moment and ask what a person in 1932 would have built with it. That is all. Just that one habit of seeing worth in what the world discards. And I would love to hear this from you. Did someone in your own family live through those years? And is there a thing they saved? A way they made do? A trick they never let go of, even after the hard times passed? Tell me about it down in the comments. Every family that came through the Depression carries one of these, and they are worth remembering out loud. Next time, we are uncovering 30 dying Depression-era hog butchering methods, the old ways that used every single part of the animal, methods so thorough the modern food inspectors would shut them down on sight today. It is a hard, honest, fascinating piece of forgotten skill, and you will not want to miss it, so subscribe, and I will see you there. Until then, take care of what you have, and remember the people who built warmth out of nothing at all.